explains the underlying laws and principles of behavior. Its goals are describing, explaining, predicting, and finally modifying the human behavior. So these are the process that happens in psychology. Now, what is behavior? Behavior in its broad sense includes all types of human activities that can directly be observed. Now, psychology as a science studies how behavior grows and develops from infancy to old age, and also studies behavioral differences in groups of people. So let's understand what is the scope of psychology. Psychology studies different forms of behavior and its scope is diverse. In today's world, psychology is referred as a psychotic octopus, as this particular subject alone has the capability of applying itself to any subject matter that it comes across. From the fields which are scientific in nature, like astronomy, astrology, medical, engineering, to the very subtle fields that are customized and designed even of homes and color preferences of the walls, psychological principles are applied. Alternative medicines such as homeopathy, Ayurveda, etc. It dispenses medicines based on the person's temperament. Okay, so psychology has found its place in defense field too, law and order, management, medical, education, sports, etc. Okay, so what is the aim of psychology? There are broad four aims in psychology. What are those? They are to describe, explain, predict, and control. Let's look at each one. These are the four main goals of psychology. What do you say what do you mean when we say describe, right? When we talk about description, let's remember Ivan Pavlov's classical conditioning of experiment, right? Ivan Pavlov was a Russian psychologist who did a lot of experiments in animals, especially with the dog. So whenever a food was placed in front of the dog used to salivate, right? And even after that, when somebody else also carried, like the assistants also carried the food, the dogs used to salivate. And Pavlov experimented it in different ways. He tried it by keeping not only the food, but associated with the bell. So when the bell rings, the dogs used to salivate, thinking that the food is there, right? So with this kind of experiment, the psychologists, what they have done, right? Their observation acted as a description of what is happening. Once psychologists describe the behavior or a phenomena, they use that as a basis for learning more about that behavior, right? So this is one of the aims of psychology, to describe. The second part is explain, right? So we use the same example. So once they observe the behavior of the dog as to how it is salivating, looking at the food, sometimes even looking at the person who's bringing the food, and the association when the bell is rung, right? All this, when the psychologist, not only describe but explains it in detail, the observed behavior. So when presented with the unconditional stimulus, what is unconditional stimulus? The food. The dogs began to salivate, which is the unconditional response. So there's a stimulus here, that is the food, and there is a response here, and the response is the salivation. Okay, so that speaks about explain. The third aspect is predict. What is predict? Based on the past observed behavior, a psychologist aims to predict how the behavior will appear again in the future, whether other people will also exhibit the same behavior. So he tried this with one dog, right? Placing the food and the dog salivated. Now, this can be experiment also with the other dog. So it's a common feature now. What happens? It becomes a predictable behavior. Predictable behavior is we are able to predict the behavior of stimulus and response. This in line with Ivan Pavlov's thinking, right? Another important aspect is control. So what is control, right? In psychology, when we say control, it refers to altering conditions that affect the behavior. Now, Pavlov's discovery helped the teachers to take control of their classroom easier so that parents could teach the children exhibit good behavior, and also manipulative older siblings could control the behavior of the younger siblings. In other areas of psychology, experiments are used to train new employees, faster increase the success of students, and reduce even drug addiction. Okay, so these are the aims of psychology. Now let's move on to the relationship of psychology with other sciences, right? There are so many other sciences where psychology has a relationship, right? We begin with the physical science, right? How is psychology related to physical science? Psychology studies the nature and interaction between the individual and physical stimuli, right? When you're talking about temperatures in the room, it is very hot in the room. It hinders the performance of the individual. It is primarily concerned with the behavior of the individual and indirectly concerned with the external stimuli. So this is how we see the link. Now, psychology and biology. Psychology has a biological basis for human behavior. The environment acts on the mind through the sense organs, and the body reacts to the environment through the muscles. So the sense organs and the muscles are organs of the body. So mental processes are closely related to the bodily processes. So that's how psychology and biology are related. We also talk about physiology. Experiences of individuals as an intimately connected with physiological process, especially of the nervous system. Behavior is bodily reaction of the individual to the physical and social environment, and psychology studies the nature of the different kinds of behavior. Psychology and logic. Psychology and logic are also related. Like psychology is concerned with the study of mental processes like conception, judgment, reasoning, while logic is concerned with mental process of also concept. Logic is also concerned with mental process of concepts, judgment, and inferences. Right? Logic deals with the validity of reasoning and the conditions of the validity. Psychology and philosophy. Psychology anyway has a roots in philosophy. So psychology is related to metaphysics, which deals with knowing a fact. Metaphysics inquires unto the ultimate nature of reality that is unknown, right? That when we talk about that ultimate nature of self, the external world, God. Psychology is not concerned of God, but it assumes reality of the mind and the external world. Psychology and sociology. Psychology deals with the behavior pattern of the individuals in relation to environment. It also studies psychological principles, right? Behavior of the crowd and mob social organization. So this is how psychology and sociology are related. Now, when we talk about sociology and anthropology, anthropology studies the evolution of mankind and the development of civilization. In particular, cultural groups are closely observed through participative observation, and these are recorded further. Now we talk about psychology and education. Education is the science of unfolding the power of the pupil and molding their character and the behavior. It implies two agents, that is the teacher and the people. A teacher utilizes the principles of psychology to develop the child's powers of observations, attention, memory, imagination, thinking, and emotion. Okay, so these are the kind of relationships that we have seen between various other areas of psychology and the related subjects. Now, what is basic and applied psychology? How is psychology applied, right, in the field? There are so many areas that we can talk about, because the understanding of the basic field of psychology is very important for us, right? So the general psychology is concerned with the introduction and overview of psychology. In the field of psychology, the basic research methods, development, emotions, motivation, personality, perception, and basic cognitive and dynamic process of psychology are studied, right? So this is the general psychology where all these aspects are studied, which we just mentioned, right? Now, what is experimental psychology, right? Experimental psychology, deals with sensation, perception, learning, memory and problem solving, communication, and also motivation. It talks about what is the basis for love between a mother and a baby. Can animals think? All these aspects, no, it just come under experimental psychology. Physiological psychology. This branch of psychology looks for explanation of behavior in physiological structures of humans and animals. Okay, then comparative psychology. The field of psychology is centered on the study of animal behavior. This area has its root in the work of researchers such as Charles Darwin and George Rummels, was grown into a highly multidisciplinary subject. Psychologists often contribute to this field as biologists, anthropologists, ecologists, geneticists, and many others. Developmental psychology. It is a concern about behavioral development over the entire lifespan, right? It is also concerned with physiology, psychological concepts such as learning, memory, motivation, and thinking, right? How do children develop the concept of the self? Is language acquisition only a question of biological maturation and learning, or has it any relation to social interaction? Personality psychology. The study of relationship between personality and behavior is an example of research in personality psychology. Social psychology is a wide-ranging field. Among the topics that are studied are friendship formation, conflict, perception, and other people's aggressiveness, etc., which are research findings in social psychology that shows about delinquency, aggressive behavior, and violence, right? Cognitive psychology studies through the process and focus of such topics as perception, language, attention, problem solving, memory, judgment, and decision making, forgetting, and intelligence. And the last part of it is the abnormal psychology. This is the field that diagnoses and treats people with abnormal behaviors. People working in the field look for biological, educational, and environmental causes of disorder. Right? So psychology is applied in various other areas. I saw a message just popping up. Can somebody read that, please?
Ma'am, she was asking you to explain slowly.
Okay, because I have a deadline that in this 1 hour, I am expected to complete 2 units. Otherwise, we will not be able to complete the portion. So if you want me to explain, then we will not be able to complete both the units. Okay. So whatever questions you have, you can note it down and refer the books. If you have the books in front of you, you can keep it and see I am dealing with the introduction to psychology on page number 11. Thank you. Okay. So what are the fields that psychology is applied? We see it is very commonly and applied in education, right? In education, how materials are developed, and strategies for enhancing the learning process of the students, okay? So educational psychology. Then school psychology, right? For the development of children in educational setting, right? We have a school psychologist, a counselor in the school and stuff like that. Family psychology. Where is psychology used in the family? It is used in terms of family conflicts. It is used in terms of treatment of marital issues, all related to this. And community psychology. That is, community psychology is how we use psychology in the community settings. That is, we do some prevention programs, like we talk about promotion of positive mental health. We talk about saying no to drugs or prevention of suicide prevention program, etc. Right? And then there is another setting, that is a clinical setting. This clinical setting, we assess people, and treat with psychological problems. In clinical setting, we are not talking about general psychological problems. We are talking about all those problems which cannot be solved with counseling. Okay, so that is where clinical psychology comes into play, right? And counseling psychology. Counseling psychologists do the same as the clinical psychologists, but they don't get into assessments, they don't get into diagnosis. They only do the counseling for psychological disorders, which could be simple, like, maybe fears, anxieties, adjustment, or relationship issues, etc. Right? So that is about the counseling psychology. And there is industrial organization policy, right? How psychology is used in the industries, right? So scientific principles are developed and applied in the workplaces. Like when you are talking about the factories or the industries and all, psychology is used in terms of appraisals, like, peer appraisals, like, organizations appraisals, and efficient job design, employee selection, recruitment, training, all this, right? And then there is consumer psychology. Consumer psychology is the study of human response to the product service related to information experiences, right? Psychologists are here to describe, predict, influence, and explain consumer products. You see how nicely consumer psychology uses, especially when you look at the advertisements and all, how they play on our emotions, like, trying to promote products, that plays on our psyche, that plays on our minds and feelings, right? And then psychology is also used in sports, right? In sports psychology, the study of psychological and mental factors that are influenced by participation and performance in sport, exercise, and physical activity. Then we have the environmental psychology, which is concerned with the relationship between psychological processes and physical environments, that is ranging from homes, offices to urban areas, right? And another aspect is the health psychology. Health psychologists are concerned with psychologists that contributes to the promotion and maintenance of good health and prevention and treatment of illness, right? They are employed. Now, where are these health psychologists found? They're found in hospitals, in medical schools, and rehabilitation centers, right? In public health agencies, private and private practices too. Then we have the rehabilitation psychology. Rehabilitation psychologists works with people who have suffered from physical deprivation or loss of birth or during later development as a result of change or deterioration, right? These rehabilitation psychologists also are in hospitals and rehabilitation centers. You must have heard about rehabilitations for street children, for delinquent children, like, for runaway children, children with maladjustments. And then you must have heard about addiction center for those with alcoholics, like alcoholic addiction or drug addiction or so many other forms of addiction. So rehabilitation psychologists are placed in these areas to help the people to get rehabilitated and get back to the normal course of life. Okay, so what are the now emerging fields in the psychology? The new emerging fields that are recently coming are aviation psychology. Aviation psychology is concerned with the aerospace, like, psychologists concerned with pilots' performance, like reducing flight crew errors, like, so many air accidents, air crashes, all this happened. So it's a new thing that is coming in, where psychologists are studying how they can reduce the errors of accident, how they can reduce the errors of plane crash and all this kind of stuff, right? Then there's experimental and human factors psychology, which is also known as ergonomics, right? Which is a diverse psychologist who research in most basic area of psychology, right? The Greek word laws of work, that is what ergonomics mean. It was first used in the military settings, where the new technologies in warfare were made difficult to the soldiers to understand their operation. So this is concerned with this particular area, like, call it an army, right, or the Air Force, where they redesign the armaments so that the personnel can easily use them, especially in the emergency situation and the crisis. Thus, ergonomics is a combination of principles of psychology, engineering, and computer science. Then we have forensic psychology and psychology with law. The field of law either studied legal issues from psychological perspective. All right. So forensic psychologists are concerned with applied and clinical facets of law, such as determining a defendant's competent to stand trial if an accident has suffered physical or neurological damage. See, forensic setting, normally forensic psychology, when we find there is an accident, right? The police comes, they take photographs and they collect evidences, like, or if there is a rape case, or if there is a murder case, So forensic psychology comes in use, or there is a robbery. They will look at all the scene where all these things are happened, take photographs, collect those material, and send it to the forensic lab. So that is all about forensic psychology and law. And then there is geropsychology. It is also called geriatric, psychology, where research is in the psychology of aging. Geropsychology that deals with the people who are aging, like, maybe 60 plus, they are moving into, maybe not able to remember, forget, memory loss, all those issues that comes with aging, which basically deals with the geropsychology. For example, they may investigate how the brain and the nervous system change as human age and what change have on behavior or how a person's style of coping with problems varies with age. And then we have neuropsychology. Psychobiologists and neuropsychologists investigate the relation between physical systems and behavior, right? And so there could be neuropsychologists who diagnose and treat disorders related to the central nervous system. And then we have psychometrics and psychology, which are concerned with the methods and technique used to apply psychological knowledge, right? A psychometrist revise old intelligence, personality, aptitude tests. You see, the corporate sector, they do a lot of psychometric tests to be able to employ the person, to see whether this person is employable, right? Quantitative psychologists and researchers in psychology and other fields design experiments and interpret the results. Psychometric and quantitative psychologists are often employed in colleges, universities, testing companies, private research firms, government agencies. Psychology for women. Psychology for women explore the principles that are in practice for either of the genders, right? So research on women that are concentrated on all the issues that women face, such as stress, like, balancing, like the personal as well as job, work-life balance, attitude, infertility, marital discord, among all other, or domestic violence, all that is related to women today. And then last thing is a political psychology. Political psychology is an interdisciplinary academic field that is dedicated to understand politics and politician and political behavior from a psychological perspective. Political psychologists presume that political actions, like all other forms of human behavior, are the result of interplay between the individual and environment, right? So we see how they employed many concepts. Politicians too, they employ many concepts and theories to explain why rulers and subjects think and act as they do, how their thoughts and action shape the course of politics. Hence, political psychology focuses on the important role of psychological factors in determining the individual response in various situations in a given environment. So political psychology is thus dynamic and a field of research that offers a unique blend of approaches and methods in social and cognitive sciences. Okay, so with this, we move to the unit 2. Okay, so now I am just moving on, because if I don't move on, I will not be able to complete, right? So now I have only 5 minutes, and for this class to end. If it is continued, I will continue, but I'll be glad to continue. So I want to take the historical and contemporary perspective psychology, right? One suggestion I would like to give you, my dear students, please go through the notes that is given to you for better understanding, because in a 1 hour class, to be able to understand, 2 units may be a little difficult, right? So please read up the unit as we move along. When you read up the unit, it will be, easy for us, because it is very clearly explained. In each unit, there are objectives, right? And very clearly defined headings of everything. Like, the definition is given, the relationship between the other areas is given with psychology, right? And in the same way, now when you are talking about historical perspectives also, there will be perspectives and there will be different theories that comes in. Okay, so when you go through step by step, read it and read it. That's what I would suggest. When you do that, it will become a little easier for you. Otherwise, it's going to get heavy on you, because, oh my God, she's running so fast. We are not able to get in. Yeah. Are you with me? Yes.
Yes, ma'am. So in case we have any questions, how do we contact you, ma'am? Can you?
So what do you do? Maybe you can message your question to me.
Okay.
I don't know whether, because how many are in the classroom?
35, 34 actually, like 34, 33 people.
God. Then my WhatsApp will be full if I get 35 people. So I will do one thing. You can message me to email, so that I'll be able to respond to your email.
Go with your email, ma'am. Can you put that in the?
Yeah. So please note my email ID: JANET, small letters, all small letters, JANET DAV @gmail.com. Got it? J
It's Janet Dave, JANETDAV at
David
gmail.com.
@gmail.com. So if you have questions and if you want to ask me, you just
Okay.
mail me. Yeah, mailing is better because WhatsApp will be too much to.
Yeah, it's a lot of people. No problem.
Yeah,
Thank
and
you.
also typing on that small phone will be a little difficult.
Yeah, and when did you start the class, ma'am? Because I joined in at 10:20, but I guess we started.
Yeah.
When did you start the class?
I was given the time 10:30. Right.
Okay.
So what I did, because we have 4 blocks and
Okay.
we have 11 units, what I
Alright.
did, I thought I will take 2 units per day, per hour.
Class.
So
Okay.
10
Alright.
minutes will be 1 unit and
Okay.
other 30 minutes will come away. So
Okay.
that way,
Okay.
at least you have a overall idea. If not, otherwise, what will happen if I sit and explain you? We will not complete, and you all have only 6 classes. So
Okay.
after that, difficult, you will not be able to sing. So this
Right.
way,
Right.
you keep the book in front of you, one, because
Yeah.
I'm referring to the book so that you are with me when I'm
Yes.
taking
Yes.
the class. Otherwise, I can talk from my PowerPoint and all. But then
Right.
when you're not able to relate to your textbook, because
Right.
your questions will come from the textbook finally.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
So
And when will we have exams, ma'am? Just to ask you the question.
that I think we can check with the administration. I have no idea.
Okay. You have no, like, generally, when do you
No,
have it? Like, just a general question.
no, I have no idea. I think we better check with that. I don't want to give wrong.
Okay.
I've
No
seen
problem.
this in a
Because-
timetable from the website, and I think it's in January.
Yeah.
It's in January. Okay.
Yeah.
Semester exams. Okay.
Yeah, first semester.
Ma'am, we don't have any notes. How can we get the notes?
This what you're not been given the notes. You have a booklet.
No.
We
We have a
online.
booklet.
No, that's your
Online
notes.
We have textbooks.
That's your notes given to you. That's your
Only
notes given to you.
textbooks. That's it, ma'am.
Yeah, that's it. And they are given references at the back, right? If you look at the chapters, you have references given. So if you want for further readings, you can look at it. There is books that is giving you introduction to psychology. There is one book I'm very familiar with by Dr. Beena and Professor Parmeshwaran, which is a very popular one, Invitation to Psychology. But maybe now more newer books must have come. So you can refer that. But basically, they have dealt it very elaborately in this notes. I am following you the notes so that it is easy for you.
Ma'am, any important questions you would suggest, ma'am?
Now, just I started only so soon. Important. Let's finish the portion.
Okay,
first,
ma'am. Okay.
right? And we can talk about all the other things, right? So we'll go very fastly. So please don't mind me just going, because I have a timeline and I don't want you to do injustice by giving you incomplete portion, right? So at least
Sure.
I can give you a basic overview. Like, you can have an overview of roughly at least an understanding of what is going on in this subject, right?
Okay, ma'am.
And
And
then-
one last question. Sorry, I know, but what about the practicals, ma'am? So will we have that again? This is in Jubilee Hills, right? The practicals. So-
Kindly keep all these questions to the administration.
Okay. Okay.
I'm very
Okay.
sorry.
No
I
problem.
apologize. I have no idea about these things. So kindly contact the.
I agree. No problem, ma'am. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Yeah.
Welcome. I'm glad you all are interacting. I'm so happy because otherwise,
Sure.
it's like I'm talking to myself. I can only see the unknown faces, but that you all are interacting, and definitely I will respond to whatever queries you all have. Right? Since I gave you my email ID, I don't think you should have a problem, right?
Thank you.
So
Thank
we
you.
will do the unit 2 and let us, try our best to complete this. We have now 30 minutes. Yeah, all of you with me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So now, what is the historical and contemporary perspectives in psychology? If you look at the contents, it is very clear, right? What we have. The objectives of this unit 2 is basically to explain philosophical contribution made by different philosophers in the subject of psychology. That is one. And the second one is describe role of physiology and psychological process to take place. And the third one, how a school of thought builds the body of knowledge, right? And the last part of it, analyze the contemporary perspective of psychology. So these are the 4 broad objectives of this unit 2, right? Okay. So even though all sciences grew up with philosophy, psychology being more closely related to philosophy took a longer time to establish its own identity. Like, most of the time, most of the subjects have come out of philosophy. Philosophy is the basis. So the root of modern science of psychology began in 400 BC in ancient Greece. The evidence of scientific thinking we find in teaching of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. These are very popular and very famous philosophers of their time, right? And what did they follow? Socrates and his disciples, they followed a method called dialectic method, which is involved in questioning and answering by logical reasoning. You wonder, what is this deductive reasoning? It's a logical approach where you progress from a general idea and you arrive at a specific conclusion, right? Okay, so what are the philosophical trends, right? That is a brief history of psychology. The history of psychology could be divided in large number of ways, and they are separated into 3 major divisions, right? So they are given you a lot of details here. I'm not reading up. I'll just give you the key places which I'm highlighting. 1860 could be seen as the birth of the experimental psychology, and Wilhelm Wundt first undertook research to discover new facts in what was probably the first laboratory experimental psychology. The critical empiricism movement begun by the Greeks was concerned with logical critique of all experiences. Now you'll be wondering, what is this empiricism? The idea that learning comes from only experiences and observations. That is what it means. And among the important later writers of the tradition are Locke, Berkeley, Hume, and Kant. All were deeply concerned with the questions of how knowledge is acquired. A related question was whether there are any innate dates or whether all ideas come from experiences. Okay, and the British associationists. Okay, now what do we understand about these people? The doctrine of associationism was put forth by Aristotle in his essay on memory, and this became the dominant theme for empiricism. The development of association reached its height in the works of James Mill. Okay, the associationist tradition concentrated upon the question of what makes ideas hang together. How do ideas bring forth others? How do ideas congeal? Right? So scientific materialism consists of attempt to describe living organisms and their processes strictly as machine, right? So the new experimental psychology then was much concerned with the epistemological. That is, epistemological means a theory of knowledge, right? Questions strongly associationistic and try to reduce mental events to physical ones. Shows pervasiveness of strong philosophical trends of critical empiricism, associationism, and scientific materialism in the middle of the 19th century. Okay, so this is going a little heavy, but nothing to be greatly worried about. Just remember a brief history of the psychology. Just read up again, read it twice, thrice for better understanding. Okay, we move on to the scientific trends. Okay, within psychology, there was much work on sense organs, right? And fascination with the man's body led to a detailed study of structures and their function, and the functional unit making up the body were studied in reflexes of both animals and men. Reaction time was a topic of great interest among astronomers, then physiologists, and later physiologists. The controversy concerned the localization of function in various brain structure, which is still raging today, was already joined in the first half of the 19th century. The most important biological concept in terms of influence upon the development of psychology was evolution. We all are aware of the Darwin theory of evolution, which was published in The Origin of Species. The influence continued with Spencer, and Darwin himself contributed to the volume of expression of emotions and animals. So you see, always experimentations were done with animals, and the association was, looked at with human beings. The atomistic approach was surprisingly successful in several different disciplines. So it was only natural that the young psychology too would try to adopt it. Chemistry served as a shining example with John Dalton engineers atomic theory and his classification of the elements. Okay, Quantitative thinking in psychology received a substantial nudge in the first half of the 19th century. Okay, so just go through this whole chapter, like, how psychology has evolved from the philosophy and how it has branched out into independent subject as what we study now, right? So the major breakthrough occurred when questions about human nature were answered by using the tools and the methods of science. By using controlled observation and experimentation, psychology attained independence from its philosophical antecedents, right? And now we focus on different schools of psychology, right? So since this evolution has come from philosophy and there was a whole process of how it came to reach wherever it is today, we focus on three major schools of thought, which is always there in the school of psychology. One is the structuralism. The second one is a functionalism. And the third one is a behavioralism, right? And each of it has its origin, right? The formal foundation of scientific psychology was laid in 1879 by Wilhelm Wundt at Leipzig in Germany, right? He was the guy who spoke about structuralism first. He attempted to study the element of consciousness. It was already discovered that atom is the smallest unit of non-living matter and cell, that the living things. Wundt and structuralists felt that the mind or consciousness could be studied in terms of its simplest units, which could account for complex psychological processes like perception, thinking, etc. The only instrument with which the elements of consciousness could be studied is the human mind. According to Wundt, was introspection. What is introspection? Introspection is looking within, that is, looking inwards. The method required the subject to examine and describe the events or happening in his or her mind or consciousness when a stimulus situation is presented to him. The introspective report of the subject is analyzed to find the simplest element of consciousness which cannot be analyzed any further, right? It was essential to the subject to be trained in this method of introspection. So he spoke about the unit of self, he spoke about the consciousness, and he spoke about introspection, like, so that is what structuralism is propagating, right? Edward Bradford Titchener, a student of Wundt, propagated that viewpoint in United States for more than a quarter century, right? Structuralism happened to be the most influential school of psychology in Germany and USA. Thereafter, it was attacked by the rival system. Later on came functionalism and then the Gestalt school of theory in Germany. And structuralism failed because its scope was too narrow, because the focus was only on that one unit of self and the consciousness. Okay, then what about functionalism? By 1900, sufficient integration took place in psychology, right? So William James believed that structuralistic approach of Wundt and Titchener were failing in their attempts in studying consciousness. Okay, so functionalists were particularly influenced. So these group of people were influenced by Charles Darwin's doctrine of adaptation to the environment and survival of the fittest, right? Inspired by the theory of evolution. The functionalistic thinking served the functions of adaptation. The emphasis here is on the process of problems of adjustment in the contemporary psychology in an outcome of this influence. So this is what is all about functionalism, right? Behavioralism, one of the most influential schools of psychology was behaviorism. When we talk about behavioralism, we remember John Watson, right? Who was troubled by the method of structuralism and functionalism and dependent a great deal on introspective method. He considered introspection as highly subjective method. In the natural and physical sciences, observation is objective. So Watson believed such kind of objectivity could be achieved in psychology. There's some noise. Please turn down the volume. Thank you. Human behavior is complex. With these small units of behavior are still studied scientifically and objectively. It is possible to get precise knowledge of that behavior. Since the behaviorists try to study behavior in terms of stimuli and response, They are also called as stimulus response psychologists, right? Their methods of investigation necessary call for experimentation, quantification, and mathematical treatment of data. The behavioristic school made great contribution in the field of learning and remembering, right? So this is all about the behavioralistic group of people, right? Now, Gestalt school. While functionalism and behavioralism were products of American psychology, Gestalt psychology was developed in Germany under the leadership of Max Rechner, Kurt Kofta, and Wolfgang Kohler. It was later imported to America, right? Gestalt psychology objected to atomistic approach of all other schools. Their slogan was, the whole is more than the sum of parts. Like they believed it is not important to only focus on the parts. What is important is to focus on the whole. So that's what the whole is more important than the sum of parts. They are also called the holistic psychologists because they emphasize the study of whole individual rather than the local situation, right? Then psychoanalysis. Psychoanalysis is a very popular thing. Like when we talk about psychoanalysis, the first person that comes to our mind is Sigmund Freud, right? An Austrian physicist published his book on interpretation of dreams. Now, according to Freud, right, he made profound observations of human behavior while dealing with his neurotic patients. He observed that the larger and significant part of our mind is unconscious. The idea of unconscious can be traced to the times earlier than Freud, right? Now, Freud focuses a lot about unconscious, subconscious, right? He also talks about ego and superego. You will learn as you move along, right? What he wanted to communicate was early childhood experiences are very important in development of personality. So psychoanalysis talks about the early years, right? It goes into analyzing what has happened in the early childhood, right? And which will help the people to be healed by using this psychoanalysis method of treatment, which many a times when the people come with problems, right? When psychoanalysis is used, they go into finding out the early childhood experiences of the person of what has happened so that they'll be able to come up with the proper solutions to be heal the person. So that is all about the psychoanalysis. Then came the humanistic psychology. Humanistic psychology focused on mostly the human aspects, right? The humanistic philosophy of psychologists believed that humans have a great potential, a capacity, right, to heal themselves, a capacity, that is much, much higher. That's how we come across all these people when we are talking about humanistic philosophy. In the developmental field of psychology, we come across Abraham Maslow, Carl Rogers, Adrian Engel, and others. They believe human nature is essentially good, that man is driven by positive force in life, and the highest need or goal in life is self-actualization, right? Later on, we'll read about how Abraham Maslow's theory of self-actualization was. Like the Gestaltists, they are holistic in their approach. Their human interest in problems dominate over compulsion to treat psychology as a science. The experimental method reduced human being to the level of machine, and psychoanalysis brought him down to the level of irrational animals, and humanistic psychologists came into existence as a sort of reaction to these methods. Okay, so these are the different schools that are very, very common when we are learning about the psychology. Now, development and decline of schools of thought and psychology. So you see how this is constantly evolving and constantly changing. Psychology evolved as a separate scientific discipline in the last quarter of the 19th century, in the initial year. The direction of new psychology was influenced profoundly by one man, Wilhelm Wundt, who had a very definite idea as to what form this new science should take, right? So you keep reading that at page number 26, right? You move on and you come to understand that psychologists today are no longer exclusively rally around Gestalt behaviorist or functionalist flags. There is a greater tendency to move towards eclecticism regardless of theories, methods, and concepts, right? The view of modern psychologists are frequently difficult to categorize into traditional school of thought. Thus, rather than discussing schools of thought, it is more useful for us to refer psychological perspectives. So we have major psychological perspectives, right? So what are those major perspectives in psychology today? They are biological perspective, right, which focuses on physiological factors. There is a psychoanalytic perspective, right, which is focusing on emotions, unconscious motivations, early childhood experiences, right? And then there is a behavioristic perspective that focuses on environmental factors of given situations and circumstances. And there is cognitive perspective that is focusing on mental processes, right? And the last one here, what we are talking about here is the social cultural variables, right? How the society, the social cultural aspects, the culture that comes with traditions and customs and all influences the perspective in understanding our psychological perspective. Okay, so each one, it is given in a very detailed thing. We can go through it, right? So what I will do, like how I did it before, I will just take the key things about each one, like, so we take at the biological perspective, right? Biological psychologists look for links between specific behaviors and particular biological factors, which often explain individual differences. The study of structures of the brain and the central nervous system, the functioning of neurons, the delicate balance of neurotransmitters and hormones, and the effects of heredity to look for the links between these biological factors and behavior, right? So now there is a great understanding of biological basis for psychological problems too, right? A biological individual is correlated with learning disabilities in the school, like children with biological issues, like often develop problems related to learning disabilities, or slow speech that is linked to hearing, etc. Right? Now, psychoanalytic perspective. Psychoanalytic perspective, as I told you before, is coming from Freud, who is very popular talking about the conscious, the unconscious, right? The ego and the superego aspects of personality. Freud believes a large chunk of the unconscious is like the iceberg, which is right at the deep of the sea. So whatever is the conscious is a very limited thing, right? So anything that is happening on the top has its roots in the subconscious. That's how he talks about the id. Id is the natural, crude, this thing, of needs, of wanting. Ego is, a rational being, very rational. Superego is something that, comes from the society, right? In simple terms, Freud wanted to tell that overriding importance is on sexual and aggressive impulses caused much controversy both inside and outside the field of psychology. Okay, so Freud believed that human mind was composed of these three elements: the id, the ego, and the superego. Id consists of primal urges, while ego is component of personality charge with dealing with reality. Superego is all this. Okay, this is one perspective coming from Freud to be able to understand the psychological aspects. Okay, and then we have behavior perspective. When we are talking about the behavior perspective, the behaviorists believe that human mind is like a black box into which stimuli are sent and from which responses are received, right? So possible to develop laws of learning that explain all behavior. The school of psychology, the behavioral psychology, view observable, measurable behavior as appropriate subject matter for psychology and emphasis on the key role of environment as a determined behavior. So we can talk about Watson, who proposed a radically new approach in psychology, right? And then came Skinner, B.F. Skinner, who agreed with Watson that the concepts of mind, consciousness, and feelings are neither objective nor measurable and therefore not appropriate to the subject matter of psychology. So Skinner argued that these concepts need to be explained behavior. One can explain behavior by analyzing the conditions that are present before behavior occurs when these analyzing the consequences that follow the behavior. Skinner's research on operant conditioning emphasize the importance of reinforcement in learning. Skinner has conducted plenty of experiments. Like one popular experiment that here we have mentioned is the operant conditioning. Operant conditioning is nothing but when you appreciate a child for a good behavior, the child repeats that behavior again and again. So that's how the behavior gets reinforced. Okay, so that is what he talks about when he talks about the operant conditioning, and when he talks also about the behavior. The idea of behavioralism are fundamentals to psychology and have developed to help us better understand the role of prior experiences in a variety of areas of psychology. Next come the cognitive perspective. Cognitive psychology is an approach of psychology that studies mental processes of how people think, perceive, remember, and learn. Okay, so cognitive perspectives are important. Cognition means thought processes, right? So each of us have a cognitive perspective. So that is what the German psychologist Hermann Ebbinghaus was focusing on, and the English psychologist Sir Frederick Barrett, who studied the cognitive and social process of remembering. Cognitive psychology sees humans not as passive recipients who are pushed and pulled by environmental forces, but as active participants who seek out experiences, who alter and shape those experiences, and use mental processes to transform the information in the course of their own cognitive development. Okay, so this is all about, read up a little more for further understanding on cognitive psychology, right? And cognitive perspective. And then there is human perspective, where we have Carl Rogers and all, who gave more importance to the persons, that is the human beings, their capacity. That people are innately good. They believe that there is so much of goodness in people and they possess free will. The humanists believe that people are capable of making conscious, natural, rational choices, which can lead to personal growth and psychological health. So these people focus more on the human elements. They believe that humans, we can make choices. As human, we can choose. And as humans, we have the goodness and pages in our behavior. And then we have the social cultural perspective. The last social cultural perspective, as I told you before also, it is basically about a study that shows how social situations influence their thinking. Social culture psychologists are particularly concerned with how people perceive themselves and others, and how people influence. Please mute. Kindly mute. There's a lot of noise. Kindly mute. Thank you. Okay, so when you're talking about the social cultural psychology,
take care. Mute your network also. Take care of yourself.
Somebody has not named themselves.
kindly mute.
Sorry, bro.
Way of talking अच्छी पढ़ेगी किसी इंग्लिश में बात करेगी.
Please mute my students. Kindly mute yourself. Okay. Social cultural psychology are social norms, the ways of thinking, feeling, or behaving that are shared by group members and perceived by them as appropriate. So what is kindly mute, Andy. Please mute your microphone. Everandi microphone. Kindly mute చేయండి.
It's 10971. Somebody not named and they are talking.
Please mute.
You can do it. You can do it, ma'am. Ma'am, you can also do it. You can mute. You can mute, ma'am.
I cannot mute because this is not in my control.
No, like you're the co-host, right? So you have the option to do it, ma'am. If you want to, you can actually do it.
If you go on the participants list, ma'am, and then from there you can.
You can actually mute it.
Thank
Great.
you. How nice. I'm learning from you all.
Nope. No
It's all
problem.
muted here. Everything is muted.
Now it's muted actually.
Yeah,
You
it's
did it
muted.
finally. Yeah.
And now it is muted.
Of course.
I don't know how they will be talking in between like this. It, you know, I can still hear people talking. Okay, norms include customs, traditions, standards, and rules as well as the general values of the group. Many of the most important social norms are determined by the culture in which we live, and these cultures are studied by cross-cultural psychologists. So the social cultural approach to understanding behavior reminds us again the difficulty of making broad generalizations about human nature. Okay, so we have now covered all the perspectives, beginning from the human perspective, biological perspective, humanistic, cognitive, right? These are all coming under the contemporary psychology perspective, right? You have a summary on page number 32. You can go through it and you can also check the progress on your model answers where you can, go through, just have a read up. You will be able to understand. Okay. So I managed on time. So I know that I have been moving faster, but I have a reason. So whatever question anywhere, kindly go through the 2 units. You will understand. Go through once, go through twice, and anywhere you feel stuck, right? And anywhere you feel it is going bounces, you just write a mail and then let me see. I will make time so that I will respond to your queries. Okay? Are you with me?
Ma'am,
Yeah.
a small doubt. Can we get notes from any regular students or anyone?
I will try and check if there is anything that I can find only on this. But other chapters, I think it should not be a problem. Everything is actually given here. You're looking for some additional notes. If I can't provide,
Yes.
I will mail you.
Because we are confusing while reading the textbook. So
Yes.
if we get any in short thing, that will be helpful to everyone.
Yeah, I understand that. So what I can do, so first thing you all go through this, okay? Unit 1
Okay,
and
ma'am.
Unit 2, please go through in detail. Read it once and
Okay.
twice, okay? You will get
Sure,
some
ma'am.
basic understanding. And if you have any doubts, you write to me and I will respond to you. That is one thing. Second thing, if I find any notes related to these 2 units, I will send it to any one of you. You please circulate among yourselves. Is that okay?
Sure. Sure, ma'am. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So anybody having anybody who's feeling that they are not able to understand, any Telugu medium people, any like that problem, just write your queries and I will try and see how I can be of help.
Sure.
Yeah.
Ma'am, one more thing. Where can we get model papers for references to start studying, ma'am?
Given here. It is already given here.
At the end of the.
You look at your book. You
Yeah.
already have model exam questions. Like you see, you
Questions.
look at the chapter 1, like unit
Yeah.
1.
Yeah.
Can you see the questions given here?
Yeah, I can see it.
Every
Yes.
chapter they are
Yes,
telling
ma'am.
you check your progress, right? So
Right.
that you are able to how much you are able to understand. Try and answer this progress question, right? Like see here, what do you understand by clinical psychology? State how psychology is applied in sports, right?
Right.
See if you
Right.
can answer the simple questions, right? That means you have understood to some extent. Now you see another check your progress. I am reading here. Psychometrics and quantitative psychology explained, right? You just go to that page number 15 and look at number 6. Psychometric and quantitative psychology is explained. See how much you can explain. See if you can elaborate a little more in your own words, right? That way you
Right.
can see. And then there is model questions here on page number 18. Define the term psychology. State how psychology can be applied in industries and organization. Write any one emerging fields of psychology. Scope of psychology. 5 basic fields in psychology. Okay, they have also given you the glossary, right? You know what this behavior means, mental
Right.
process, applied psychology, right? So just get yourself familiarized. I will tell you, please use your books, right? Don't keep your books for exams. Don't wake up one fine day in the early hours on hey, something I will read. Just go and write off something psychology. It won't work like that, okay?
Yeah, psychology, it won't work. I agree, ma'am.
It won't work like that. At least you should have basic understanding, right?
Of course. Of
Yeah.
course.
Yeah. So everywhere you find check your progress, and everywhere you're finding model exam question papers, glossary, and even further readings they are given. So you go through all this, and I'm sure you should be able to do very well. And I am there since I've taken responsibility to teach. It's my responsibility to also ensure that you understand.
Sure.
Okay,
Thank you, ma'am.
so because of the given time frame, we are trying to do our best. But I'm sure that I will be able to give you as much content as you want and prepare you properly for. Because as
Thank you so
somebody
much.
yeah.
Thank you so much, ma'am. We appreciate that. No problem. Of
Welcome.
course.
Very little time. It looks like I can go to the third unit.
Thank you, ma'am.
We'll just see till this thing is on, I'll continue. Right?
Yes,
Once it is on.
go ahead, ma'am. Yes,
Okay.
no problem.
Yeah. So the next thing what we have is the methods of psychology. It is very, actually, see, it is all in your mind. If you think it is easy, it will be easy. I'm using a little bit of psychology on you all. If you start thinking already in your mind, oh my God, it's so difficult. Now, what is this function? What is the structuralism? I don't know whether I'll be able to remember. Please don't think that way, right? Make sure your cognitive processes are positive, right? So keep thinking and keep, telling yourself that it is easy. I'll be able to do it like that, right? So your methods are very easy, right? In the methods, we have contents, objective, interaction, introspection method, and then observation methods. We have types, like, types of observation. Then we have the survey method in psychology, like, how surveys are done, right? And then we have case study method, how case studies are written, and, and then we have experimental methods, how in psychology, we can use experimental method in doing a research, methods of establishing experimental control, stages of experimental method, correlation method, how two variables are, related, how they are correlated, like, and there is a summary, then you have the progress, model paper, glossary, and further reading. Okay, so the objective of this unit, everybody is holding a book in your hands.
Yes, sir, ma'am. Not sure about
Anybody?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, yes,
Any
we
one
are.
person
Yes,
can,
yes, ma'am.
can read the objective? Any one person can read the objective? Just to make sure that you are participating, so you don't get bored of my voice only. Can
Sure,
someone
ma'am.
read the-
Objective is after studying this unit, you should be able to identify different methods in psychology, describe
Yes.
various methods used in psychological research,
Yes,
differentiate between the experimental methods and other methods,
yes,
explain how to use various methods in various research. These are the
Yes.
objectives of this unit.
yeah, very good. So these are the broad objectives of this unit. It is basically focused on how a research is done in psychology and what are the methods that are being used. Okay, so the first method that is stated is the introspection method. Now, what is this introspection method and what are the merits and the demerits, right? This is one of the oldest method in psychology. And it's the introspection is the word derived from Latin words intro, meaning within, and inspection means to look into oneself. That is looking into oneself.
Ourselves.
So yeah, it is basically a self-observation, or in other words, experiences one's own mental states, observe, analyze, and report one's own feeling, right? So which means to say, I observe my own feelings, I observe my own thought processes, I observe my own behavior, and I make a report out of it, and I analyze that, right? So that is what it comes to. So now let us turn to three psychologists, James, Stout, and Morgan, who knew about this method. According to William James, introspective observation is what we have to rely on first and foremost and always. The word is need hardly to be defined. It means already I spoke about what this is about. So it is concerned with, okay, each of them have given a definition of what it means to have introspection. Okay, so you read up those definitions, you will have a basic understanding about this introspection method. And then you have the merits and the demerits. I don't know whether demerits is given. Yes, merits and demerits of introspection. So what is the merits means advantages. Like, what is the advantages of having an introspection method, right? It is easy because it is done by our own self, right? It does not need any laboratory or any tool. We don't have to go to any places, to get this done. right? And the investigation also is the same. That is, you yourself are investigating your own thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. It is most economical method and enables us to know about our mental state. That is, it doesn't cost us anything to understand our own emotions and our own behavior and our thought process. Okay, it is a method that generated a lot of research and is used in the mental studies. And then there are demerits. What are the demerits? The drawbacks of this method, right? So it means looking into one's emotions and feelings. So one attempt to look into mental state, it disappears, and therefore it is different to introspect the change in psychological experiences. Okay, since our cognitions are changing processes, like when our thought processes change, our feelings also will change. So it is not a permanent thing that, so to introspect the changing behavior, the changing feelings, the changing thought process may be a little difficult. So that is one of the demerits, that a disadvantage. And the subject and the investigator is the same, right? So it becomes subjective and biased. Since I am investigating my own self and I am self-introspecting, I may not be 100% accurate because there could be biases from my own self, right? And this method can be done by abnormal individuals and children too, right? So this is purely very subjective. We won't be able to get objective results out of this. A person should be highly trained and skilled to introspect properly, right? So we need to be sensitive, like we need to be very, very aware. That self-awareness skill should be high. Like we should have that much of sense of self-awareness where I need to be able to think, catch my thought processes, may be able to think about, identify my feelings and my behavior, right? Only then I will be able to do a proper analysis. According to Kant, a famous scholar, it is not possible to accept conscious experience as a subject matter of psychology and then consider introspection as its proper method. Hence, we conclude that introspection method cannot be considered as precise. The limitation can be overcome by proper training, right? If we sharpen our skills of self-awareness, we should be able to do it in a proper way. Okay, so they are giving us questions and we can see if we can answer this question. The next method is the observation method. Now, what is observation method? This can happen in a laboratory, right? We can observe. Observation is a powerful tool of psychological inquiry. In general, researchers use observation as a scientific tool to learn about behavior. It is an effective method of describing a behavior. In our daily life, we remain busy with observing numerous things throughout the day. Many a time we do not take notice of what we are seeing or what we have seen, but we do not observe. Okay, so it is accepted by psychologists that individuals' overt behavior is the result of internal mental conditioning. Okay. Yes. Okay. So certain principle that needs to be followed in observation. Okay, so in everyday life, we come across so many things. We see, we use all our sense organs. We look around and all, but we don't really notice those things. We don't have that observation kind of an eye to observe certain things. So if you want to get into this method, what are the principles that needs to be followed? So observation method can only be made by individual behavior, but of the whole situation. So proper planning of the observation process should be made. Objectives must be clear. Proper tools for recording must be kept. Observer must select the appropriate number of subjects to be observed. Too many will be difficult to manage, right? And this limit of observation must also be fixed. Too long time may make the observer distracted and tired. And if it is too short, it will not yield the proper information. As observation is a systematic process, the observer must have proper skills and aptitude and the ability to report accurately. Till then, will the data be reliable? So they are given the types of observation here, advantages. This is all very easy because see, if you are trying to observe a child, right? If it's in a laboratory, it is all set in a controlled place where you observe how the child eye movements are, how the child is moving, what is doing. There was a call. I think I need to stop because I have another session at 12. So nice interacting with you all, students. I think I stop here with the observation method. Please read up a little more and tomorrow we will continue. Is that okay?
Okay, ma'am.
Okay, ma'am.
We will continue. So read up a little more about tomorrow, 3 and 4, and then we will be able to. Okay? Because they have studied another session, I may have to enter another class. Thank you and God bless.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, ma'am.